David asked the soldier standing nearby, "What will a man get for killing this Philistine and ending his defiance of Israel? Who is this pagan Philistine anyway, that he is allowed to defy the armies of the living God?" David's attitude is almost that of a, like, okay, are we really going to take this? He's insulting our God by calling us out like this. We can't just let that stand. What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. Alright. So now we've got 1 Samuel 17, and last chapter, David was anointed king, or the next king. Saul is still actually, current reigning king, actively on the throne and in charge. But David's officially going to be the next one. Now, David and Saul are actually, acquainted toward the end of the chapter. Saul has just a troubling spirit, it calls it. He's got, like, mental struggles. And in order to help soothe him, they brought in someone to play the harp to help, ease his mind. And that, lo and behold, that harp player ends up being David. So now David is actually serving King Saul, with the knowledge that he's going to be the next king. But let's just read the chapter here and see how things progress. So, 1 Samuel 17, here we go. Philistines now mustered their army for battle and camped between Soko and Judah. Soko in Judah and Azekah at Ephes Dammim? I don't know. Not sure about that pronunciation, but anyway. Saul countered by gathering his Israelite troops near the valley of Elah. So the Philistines and Israelites faced each other on opposite hills, with the valley between them. Then Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel. He was over 9 feet tall. He wore a bronze helmet, and his bronze coat of mail weighed 125 pounds. He also wore bronze leg armor, and he carried a bronze javelin on his shoulder. The shaft of his spear was as heavy and thick as a weaver's beam, tipped with an iron spearhead that weighed 15 pounds. His armor-bearer walked ahead of him carrying a shield. Goliath stood and shouted a taunt across to the Israelites. "Why are you all coming out to fight?" he called. "I am the Philistine champion, but you are only the servants of Saul. Choose one man to come down here and fight me. If he kills me, then we will be your slaves. But if I kill him, you will be our slaves. I defy the armies of Israel today. Send me a man who will fight me." When Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. So, Philistines are continuing to fight against Israel. And as it describes, the Philistines and Israelites end up on opposite hills, and Goliath winds up coming out basically to challenge them. Really big dude. Now this says he was over 9 feet tall. The Hebrew says 6 cubits and a span, which totals about 9.75 feet or 3 meters. Now the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Greek version read 4 cubits and a span, which would be 6.75 feet. But, given that this is one of those complicating things with, having multiple, historic, traditional documents that people rely on for translation, it, I think, is later mentioned about, Goliath being descended from, like, an offshoot of the Anakites, who were supposed to be giants of a sort. Now, granted, getting close to 7 feet tall is still pretty tall, but that's like, you know, center on a basketball team kind of tall, not like, holy cow, this dude is a literal giant tall. I mean, still, either way, point is, dude's big, he's mean, and with all this stuff about his armor, his weapons, all that, it also implies that he's strong. Yeah. Absolute beast of a man that nobody would really want, that no regular person would probably want to fight one-on-one. Checking other footnotes here. So, where it mentions the bronze male weighing 125 pounds, Hebrew says 5,000 shekels, which is believed to weigh 57 kilograms, and I assume that's close to 125 pounds. I know there's over 2 pounds in a kilogram. So, anyway. And then more weights down here. It says 600 shekels for the iron spearhead. But, yeah. Big, burly dude who would be an absolute nightmare to fight. But he, you know, it's the we don't really get the tone of his voice per se. He could be trying to make it sound like well, let's not have everybody fight and all these people potentially die. Just, you know, send out I'm the Philistine champion. You all can send out your champion to come fight me, and we'll just duke this out one-on-one. No need for all these other people to die. But really, I mean, with him being so big, it was probably also a way to just try and give the Philistines an easy victory. In any case, all that happens. Goliath makes this challenge. And then we get to verse 12. Now David was the son of a man named Jesse, an Ephrathite from Bethlehem in the land of Judah. Jesse was an old man at that time, and he had 8 sons. Jesse's 3 oldest sons, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shimea, had already joined Saul's army to fight the Philistines. David was the youngest son. David's 3 oldest brothers stayed with Saul's army, but David went back and forth so he could help his father with the sheep in Bethlehem. Now, wasn't he helping Saul too? I don't know. I mean, it says he went back and forth, so maybe that's what he had been doing all along. I don't know. Anyway. The oldest sons are right there with the army, though. David, not so much. Also, Hebrew for Shimea might have read Shema, but same name, different spelling. Okay. Then verse 16. For 40 days, every morning and evening, the Philistine champions strutted in front of the Israelite army. One day Jesse said to David, "Take this basket of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread, and carry them quickly to your brothers. And give these 10 cuts of cheese to their captain. See how your brothers are getting along, and bring back a report on how they're doing." David's brothers were with Saul and the Israelite army at the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines. Now, also, why it feels the need to, like, reintroduce Jesse, I don't know, but I will say it helps, you know, when people just read this chapter isolated from other ones. Plus, repetition in these stories helped a lot, especially in, Old Testament times. A lot of this was just told as stories orally rather than actually written down and read by a multitude of people. They wouldn't, even if it was written down, like, they wouldn't have generally been able to make a whole lot of copies of it for a lot of people to read. So, the repetition helps there. Anyway, so David's taking supplies and gonna kind of scout the situation and report back. Or at least that's what he's been asked to do by his father. Hebrew says ephah rather than basket of roasted grain. So that gives you more of like a measurement of how much was there. And then footnote that says report on how they're doing. Hebrew says and take their pledge. That's definitely or at least it could be a different kind of meaning, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just not as familiar with that phrasing. And anyway, point is, David's gonna go to where his brothers are, give them some food, and see how things are going. Then we get to verse 20. So David left the sheep with another shepherd and set out early the next morning with the gifts, as Jesse had directed him. He arrived at the camp just as the Israelite army was leaving for the battlefield with shouts and battle cries. Soon the Israelite and Philistine forces stood facing each other, army against army. David left his things with the keeper of supplies and hurried out to the ranks to greet his brothers. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, came out from the Philistine ranks. Then David heard him shout his usual taunt to the army of Israel. Which, reminder, this had been happening for 40 days. Yeah. It's quite a while of having this back and forth. Now, it implies that maybe there was already some fighting going on. But anyway, maybe there wasn't. I don't know. When it says his brothers were at the Valley of Elah fighting against the Philistines, maybe, it was more of a, like, ready to fight against them. Or they had fought against them before Goliath came out and issued this challenge. I don't know. But anyway, so David goes out to the battlefield, I guess, or at least near it. And here's Goliath's challenge. Then we get to verse 24. As soon as the Israelite army saw him, they began to run away in fright, him being Goliath. Have you seen the giant? The men asked. He comes out each day to defy Israel. The king has offered a huge reward to anyone who kills him. He will give that man one of his daughters for a wife, and the man's entire family will be exempted from paying taxes. David asked the soldier standing nearby, what will the man get for killing this Philistine and ending his defiance of Israel? Who is this pagan Philistine anyway, that he is allowed to defy the armies of the living God? And these men gave David the same reply. They said, yes, that is the reward for killing him, as described in the couple of verses prior. But when David's oldest brother Eliab heard David talking to the men, he was angry. What are you doing around here anyway? He demanded. What about those few sheep you're supposed to be taking care of? I know about your pride and deceit. You just want to see the battle. What have I done now? David replied. I was only asking a question. He walked over to some others and asked them the same thing and received the same answer. Then David's question was reported to King Saul, and the king sent for him. So, most of the men seem to be afraid. But David asks what's going on and realizes that there's a reward for killing this guy and is wondering why this has been allowed to go on for however long it has. Now, it says 40 days up here, so we might have a better idea than David did, really, of how long it was going on. But, like, David's attitude is almost that of a, like, okay, are we really going to take this? He's insulting our God by calling us out like this. We can't just let that stand. But Eliab is like, really? What are you doing here? And basically, now I don't know if this whole pride and deceit thing in that Eliab speaks of is stemming from David being anointed in the previous chapter. But you know, it sounds actually kind of reminiscent of, you know, Joseph, the dreamer Joseph that had the bright coat, and his brothers just kind of being like, you know, Joseph had these visions from God that he was going to rule, and his brothers were like, come on, really? No, there's no way. And they, like, didn't really like him because of how much he was boasting about that. We don't really hear about David having the same attitude. Other than this little exchange with Eliab here is the only really hint of that we get to this point. But anyway, so David's been asking about the situation. Word gets to Saul about David's questions. Okay, so verse 32. Don't worry about this Philistine, David told Saul. I'll go fight him. Don't be ridiculous, Saul replied. There's no way you could fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy, and he's been a man of war since his youth. But David persisted. I've been taking care of my father's sheep and goats, he said. When a lion or bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and club it to death. I have done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too, for he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord, who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear, will rescue me from this Philistine. And Saul finally consented. All right, go ahead, he said, and may the Lord be with you. So, I don't know if that's exactly a comparable situation, fighting against wild animals as opposed to, you know, a big burly man. You would tend to think, you know, a human would be a little more intelligent, you know, maybe have some different tactics or whatever. But in any case, because of all this stuff that David has gone through and seeing how the Lord has helped him in all those situations, he's not afraid. So he just insists that he wants to go fight Goliath. And while Saul is hesitant to let him do that at first, after some convincing, he's like, all right, fine. I also wonder if maybe at first Saul's hesitation was because he didn't want to lose his harp player. But anyway, then we get to verse 38. Then Saul gave David his own armor, a bronze helmet and a coat of mail. David put it on, strapped the sword over it, and took a step or two to see what it was like, for he had never worn such things before. "I can't go in these," he protested to Saul. "I'm not used to them." So David took them off again. He picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them into his shepherd's bag. Then, armed only with his shepherd's staff and a sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistine. Now, first off, Saul was, mentioned back multiple chapters ago, I want to say around chapter 9, as being noticeably taller than anybody else in Israel. So really, you would think if anybody was going to take on Goliath, it should have been Saul. At least it would have been physically a closer matchup. And that just makes it all the more awkward for David possibly trying to wear his armor. Unless David was also that tall. It doesn't really say. But it didn't mention David being particularly tall when it described his physical features. In any case, whatever the reason was, the armor and all that was too awkward for David, and he says, nope, it's not gonna help me, I'm not used to it, it'll just slow me down. And now he's about to go fight Goliath with just a sling and his staff. Then we get to verse 41. Goliath walked out toward David with his shield-bearer ahead of him, sneering in contempt at this ruddy-faced boy. "Am I a dog," he roared at David, "that you come at me with a stick?" And he cursed David by the names of his gods. "Come over here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and wild animals," Goliath yelled. So he feels severely disrespected by the fact that a boy has been sent, or at least has come out to challenge him. Big, strong, presumably older, giant of a man. But, verse 45, David replied to the Philistine, "You come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Today the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head. And then I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescues his people, but not with sword and spear. This is the Lord's battle, and he will give you to us." So, David still ain't afraid. And in fact, kind of turns Goliath's threat back around and says, "Yeah, you think you're going to do this to me, but God is going to give me victory. And then all that stuff that you just said would happen to me, that's going to happen to all your fellow soldiers here." And then verse 48. As Goliath moved closer to attack, David quickly ran out to meet him. Reaching into his shepherd's bag and taking out a stone, he hurled it with his sling and hit the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank in, and Goliath stumbled and fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with only a sling and a stone, for he had no sword. Then David ran over and pulled Goliath's sword from its sheath. David used it to kill him and cut off his head. So, the threat of, Goliath's head being cut off, David made good on it, even though he didn't have his own sword. It does make you wonder how big Goliath's sword was. There's nothing really saying one way or the other on that. But David wins, and Goliath is dead. So then we move on to this next section here that I'm just realizing is actually partway through verse 51. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they turned and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah gave a great shout of triumph and rushed after the Philistines, chasing them as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron. The bodies of the dead and wounded Philistines were strewn all along the road from Shaaraim as far as Gath and Ekron. Then the Israelite army returned and plundered the deserted Philistine camp. David took the Philistines' head to Jerusalem, but he stored the man's armor in his own tent. Interesting that the Philistines get chased as far as Gath, considering that's where Goliath was from. That's as in some Greek manuscripts. Hebrews reads a valley. Would it be just as far as a valley, or as far as a valley and the gates of Ekron? I don't know. But presumably it would have been, a different valley, because they had previously been, on opposite hilltops. Presumably with a valley in between. But anyway. Point is, Israel's army now comes chasing after the Philistines, who are all running away because their champion was dead. And if Goliath could get killed like that, they had no idea probably what could have happened to them and how easily they could have been killed. So, long story short, resounding victory for Israel's armies after David kills Goliath. Now it says he took the Philistines, presumably Goliath's head, to Jerusalem, which it's not outright stated if that's where Saul is. But anyway, it was somewhere else, probably for the sake of a display, a memorial. I don't know what exactly you'd want to call it, but basically to show to others that this guy, this big, strong warrior, is dead, and we've achieved a great victory over the Philistines because of our God. Anyway, then verse 55. As Saul watched David go out to fight the Philistine, he asked Abner, the commander of his army, "Abner, whose son is this young man?" "I really don't know," Abner declared. "Well, find out who he is," the king told him. As soon as David returned from killing Goliath, Abner brought him to Saul with the Philistine's head still in his hand. "Tell me about your father, young man," Saul said. And David replied, "His name is Jesse, and we live in Bethlehem." So, it almost makes me wonder if the time with David, playing the harp to help soothe Saul was like he was there doing that frequently for a time, and then maybe didn't need to quite so often. I don't know. You would think Saul would have recognized him. But then again, I don't know. Saul probably has tons of servants at this point. Also loads of other soldiers, commanders, all sorts of different people he's got to deal with. So, if for whatever reason David had left for a time, I suppose it's not ridiculous that Saul would have forgotten what he looked like, but it still seems kind of odd. Anyway, or who knows, maybe David just got a major haircut or something. I say that jokingly, but anyway, so David and Saul kind of are reacquainted. And then that is the end of the chapter. All right, so there you have one of the more classic stories of the Bible, or at least one of the more often told stories of David and Goliath, and how, like, despite seemingly crazy odds, David winds up beating Goliath, and so things just keep looking better for David and his prospects of becoming king. Saul is still king, though, and I mean, this wasn't exactly a bad thing for him either, because major victory over the Philistines, his most persistent enemy throughout his lifetime. But anyway, it's more on the development of David stepping into the role of king as we progress. Anyway, as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell if you're on YouTube to get updates when I post new videos. If you're seeing this anywhere else, give me a follow or whatever you got to do for that platform. Look down in the description to get info on other social media pages and all that good stuff. And leave comments down below the video with any thoughts you have. Definitely still looking for input on the whole background music balance thing. I think I might have erred on the side of making it quiet just because I didn't want it to be too distracting. But let me know what you think. So, that's going to do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video. But whatever the case is, till next time, stay cool, people.